Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Moore, and this is Art Watch Radio on WCHE 1520, every Wednesday from 1 to 1:30. So happy you could all join us today. Today, my guest is artist Francis di Fronzo. His solo exhibition at Somerville Manning Gallery opens October 16th, which already passed, and is on view through November 14th. Hey, Francis, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Before we get into it, I do want to let everyone know that Francis is joining us from California right now via a phone interview. You do live in Irvine, and you've had to evacuate because of the fire, so I do want to thank you even more for taking the time to be with us. I know that can't be easy.
Sure, no problem. It's actually pretty comfortable here in the evacuation.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I do want to let everyone know that Francis's show is an in-person exhibition and is on view in the gallery and open to the public. We are taking precautions to make sure everyone can safely enjoy the work. Masks are required, and we are encouraging people to call ahead when possible just so we can control the amount of people in the gallery at any given time. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again, art galleries are a great place to be right now since it's an intimate setting with a lot of personal space. So when you come to the gallery, Francis, you've had put together an amazing collection for this show. Can you just tell us a little bit about what visitors can expect to see?
Sure. You can expect to see what's in my mind, essentially. The exhibition is sort of a tour of everything I do, landscape paintings, seascape painting, and a bit of this, bit of that, all the things that I think about that I want to turn into images, turn into paintings, is on display in this exhibition.
When you say landscape paintings and ocean paintings and things like that, I want to reiterate for our listeners that it may not be what they're used to seeing and what they're kind of picturing in their head. I think, the Brandywine tradition in this area, they have, some people have some preconceived notions of what that may mean. Can you tell us a little bit about how maybe the work has a different feel than just a more traditional landscape painting?
Most definitely. I mean, for one thing, I was born in California, but I was raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so I have sort of a aesthetic that is part East Coast, part West Coast. This exhibition is a little more leaning toward West Coast, I'd say, a lot of desert scenes. I think my upbringing was very much connected with Andrew Wyeth and East Coast aesthetic, lots of green and trees. But as I grew up on the West Coast, my experience of the landscape was pretty different from what I had in the East Coast. So I love the deserts, and I want to portray the deserts in the same sort of passion and attention to detail that East Coast painters give to East Coast landscapes. So what you're seeing is essentially paintings that are of the California deserts or seascapes, but painted in a way that is sort of richly detailed and sort of, not monochromatic, but in a sort of simple tonal paintings that sort of express the feeling of the deserts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these landscapes
No, go ahead.
A lot of these landscapes are also not of real places. They're paintings that I've created out of my mind. So they're not specifically about the West Coast or the West in general, but they're an idea of how I feel about the West, the Southwest. And so you're not looking at specific places. You're just seeing my interpretation of the deserts.
Mm. Yeah, and just like any artist, you obviously go through transitions, and you've mentioned the East Coast and the West Coast, but recently I have seen you circling back to some more familiar subject matters, like the ocean scene that you had mentioned.
Sure.
There's another one that kind of takes me back to your field scenes when you were in Pennsylvania as well.
Yeah.
What is it like to kind of revisit more familiar subject matter, but it's in a very evolved sense, I think, as to the earlier work?
Yeah, so to reflect upon my earlier work, I painted these grassy landscapes that were very much about the East Coast and even the Midwest, just wide open spaces and really almost no sign of human existence. They were just strictly landscape paintings, no people at all, no homes, no nothing, no cars, no highways. And there was a sense in those paintings that those places existed either before or after mankind. And over the last 10 years or so, I've been painting things that are strictly human creations, like trains and cars and homes, buildings, structures, and even telephone poles and the basic things that create our society. And I'm kind of rounding back to these empty landscapes because about a year ago, I began to think about environmentalism and think about what we're leaving to our children and our grandchildren and such, and my concern that we may be destroying the environment in which we live. And so we are doing it. And so my idea began to evolve into this almost like you're looking back at what mankind did to the environment. So you're seeing things like old hotel signs in the desert. Again, there's no sign of human life, but you're looking back upon what used to be human life and what used to be sort of our lifestyle, driving on highways and stopping on roadside cafes, diners and things. And those things are now empty, and they're decaying in the environment. So there's still this sense of emptiness and lack of human existence, but it's now sort of a post-human existence. As before, it was more sort of like before humans were there. Now it's after.
That's really interesting. Yeah, well, and I mean, I think there's a little bit of grimness to the work, but I prefer to use the word mysterious.
Of course, yeah.
Because there are, there's somewhat philosophical dark ideas sometimes in your work, but they're not super gloomy and depressing all of the time. There's still a lot of really great color, beautiful sunsets, and I think maybe, I guess that's the point, right, is to remember that nature is beautiful, and whether or not we come in, build these buildings, and leave, nature hopefully will still remain. And that's a really interesting idea.
But it's also very much about the timelessness of nature, that no matter what we do, no matter what our lives are about, it always passes. But nature is this continuum. It's like the stage that we just live on it, And once we're gone, the stage is still there. The stage still exists. The sky is still there. And this is sort of this eternal, ongoing life that exists outside of us. That's part of what I want to portray, is that time is endless, and we're just here for a little bit of time. But I
love that, because I really do love that, because I always kind of saw your work, especially the work with the hotel signs and things like that, that I would consider very Route 66 kind of, as like nature taking back. And that was always a really powerful thought for me. And so I guess the fact that I see that while looking at your work means that you're expressing that successfully.
Well, it's not even taking back. I think that there's a constant fight against nature. Where I live in Irvine is like a very manicured, perfectly suburban sort of paradise, if you will. But nature is very much controlled. And like what we're going through right now, these fires, is nature kind of saying, wait a second, you're not in control of things at all, And so there's this, humans constantly fight nature to prevent it from taking over our environments. And if you get out in the deserts, you'll see places that look as if they've been abandoned for, hundreds of years, because they're so, worn
Hi, Kelly.
out. But they've only been abandoned for,
Hi, Kelly.
years or so.
I would imagine that the ecosystem and everything too kind of rapidly erodes these places more than they would, if they were in other places too. But
I think it depends. There are spots out in the Mojave where you can still see the wagon trails, because there's so little rainfall, and it's really remarkable to see how slowly things can happen. But other places, depending on construction materials, you can have homes and such that decay very rapidly, and the sun can really wear things out quickly. There's sort of a interesting melancholy to it, but it's also you also get this there's overwhelming sense of beauty in those environments too.
Yeah.
That I try to reach this balance where there is this sort of sadness, and there's an equal amount of beauty in the work. But you touched earlier on mystery, and that is, to me, in a way, one of the most important parts of my work is that I want mystery in there, because that's what really draws you into the painting. If you kind of wonder what is happening or what happened there, there's a painting in our show of a 55 Chevy Nomad, and it's just sort of parked out in the desert. And that painting, for me, really draws people into the story, because there was a family in that car. There's some story behind that, how that car got there and why it's still there. That kind of thing really draws me in and makes me curious. So I want to have my viewers have the same experience when they're being drawn into a story. They don't know what the story is. They don't know where it's going, but it's just enough to pull you in.
Well, it's so interesting because even just the stories that, you're pulled into your paintings, but there's also, when I look at your pieces, especially the larger ones that have so much detail and going on in it, I see something new in it every time. And so that's really an interesting fact for me to explore these paintings, whether it's a door with peeling paint that I never noticed before. Or, for instance, I'm thinking about your painting Cathedral, which is a large-scale blue train car. Right. And, when I look at images on the screen and things like that, oh, that's beautiful, one of Francis' trains, it's great. But when you see it in person, I never realized until I got close all of the little graffiti on it. And that really is, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, is the point of the title. This train has become this somewhat cathedral sanctuary for so many people. So not only are you diving into the story of this train car, the story of the people that interact with it, but it's one of those things that unless you're physically interacting with your work, I don't know if you would have seen it immediately.
No, you wouldn't. And in fact, that's kind of what I love to do with my viewers, is not just draw them in with the story, but also draw them in visually. There is a ton of detail there. Some of the parts of the painting are very quickly painted, sort of gestural almost. Other parts are extremely detailed. They have very fine printing and graffiti here and there. And, as you get closer and closer to the painting, you're kind of seeing how I see it as I'm working on it. I get sort of involved in these parts of the painting and get really focused on them and lost in them. And I'll spend maybe a day working on just, some rust or graffiti in a certain area. And I want the viewer to have the same experience so that you can enjoy it at a distance and enjoy it at 6 inches. It's very important for me to have a total experience with the painting, not just, visually, but also, intellectually. I want people to look at it and wonder what it's about, and enjoy it, in every possible way.
Well, and I get it doesn't hurt either that, a good amount of your work is larger in scale. So it does demand the space when you're in front of it, whether it's in a gallery, a home, anything. And so I think that definitely lends to it because, as you said, when you paint and you're kind of like getting lost in it, it allows the viewer to get lost in the painting as well, which is really amazing. Yeah.
It also gives the, if somebody buys a painting of mine and it hangs on the wall for, years, people keep discovering things over time, too. So it isn't like you buy a pretty picture and hang it on the wall. There's a sort of conversation that happens over time as you discover more things and as the light changes and as you see things, it does evolve over time. So it's not just a static thing as well. Absolutely. And because of the different metaphorical layers and everything in the work, I mean, it's going to change with the person's life and everything. I mean, even just from the start of your show till now, it's been 2 weeks, and I feel like some of the paintings are already changing for me just as to what's going on in the world. So if something can change within 2 weeks, who knows what can change within 20 years of having it, Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. So once again, you said you can get lost in it and things like that, and I love when the viewer does. Some of them, I don't know, I feel are kind of Zen-like and meditative in a way. And specifically your ocean paintings, I've always been a huge fan of them. I even borrowed one from the gallery for a little bit and kept it in my house and would just wake. Yeah, right. But it was one of your older dark oceans, and it was literally one of the last things I saw before I went to bed and the first things I saw when I woke up, and it really was an act of meditation for me. And I don't know if while you're painting these, does it somewhat become that for you as well?
Yeah, it can. I mean, I think making a painting is a complicated thing because you're dealing with materials that are fluid and at times causing you problems. So it is sort of a weird thing that happens when you're painting. Sometimes you fall into it and you get into a trance almost when you're working. Other times you're struggling with it and you have to sort of use your mind to sort of think about, what do I do next and how do I treat this area? So honestly, the seascapes are in some ways the most challenging paintings for me because they do require a lot of technique. And for me personally, the landscape paintings are by far the most meditative paintings. I make the skies especially are, I don't think at all. I just go into them and start painting and, my mind kind of turns off. So it's a very meditative process for me to actually paint skies.
I would like to discuss your technique and materials a little bit more, but for right now, we do have to take a break. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with artist Francis di Fronzo. All right, welcome back to Art Watch Radio, WCHE AM Radio 1520. This is Rebecca Moore, director of Somerville Manning Gallery, and my guest today is the painter Francis di Fronzo, whose solo exhibition is on view at the gallery and runs through November 14th. So before the break, we were starting to talk about your technique, which is something that you've always experimented with over the years, and I think is so amazing to see your different styles. But it is interesting. One of the questions I get asked the most in the gallery when people come in to see your work is, what does it mean, oil over watercolor and gouache? And so some people, I think, have a hard time making that combination in their head. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose that combination of mediums, and if it kind of adds a little bit more to your work than just strictly painting in oil?
It sure does. I kind of grew up and was trained as an artist to make sketches. And, you sort of work out how big the painting is going to be, the dimensions, the ratio of the dimensions. And then you start doing this drawing. You sort of figure out the composition. And then we do a color sketch in watercolor or with gouache. And then you prep your panel or your canvas and you make your painting, right? And so I really hated that process of having to go through these sketches and oftentimes you do a little thumbnail sketch of a what's going to become a large scale painting, and it doesn't work large scale. It may work on a 8 by 10 piece of paper, but when you scale it up to 32 by 48 or whatever, it changes. It doesn't work the same way. So I started to actually do my sketching on the finished panel. And I was, again, working in pencil and then watercolor and gouache to get a sort of a rough idea of how the finished painting would look. And I love that technique of starting the painting with water-based materials and then painting the oil painting on top of it, because for one thing, it's faster. You get the water-based materials drying in a few minutes, whereas if you're using oils to do a sketch, it takes sometimes hours to dry. So the whole process of getting a sketch done is very quick. It's done almost immediately. And you move on to the oils. But as I kept working on this technique, I found that I was getting into more and more details with the gouache and watercolor. And it had the gouache in particular had this unique quality where it has this sort of dry chalkiness to it. And that works well for me in terms of painting things like rust and train cars and telephone poles and things like this, even rocks and such. So a lot of what you're seeing in my work is the underlying painting of watercolor and gouache, and then I go into oil on top of that. So, but a lot of the watercolor and gouache actually shows through. So, it sort of took me some time to get comfortable with this technique. Probably took about 10 years, actually, to get really confident at it. And again, I'm not actually mixing the materials. I'm simply letting the water-based materials dry first, and then I seal them with a clear acrylic varnish, and then I paint oil on top of it. So it's almost like a stage technique of painting where you work with water-based materials first, then oil on top. And again, it's a quicker process. It allows me to see the finished painting at the actual scale I'm painting it. And so it's just much more enjoyable for me to work that way. And when you see the finished painting, you're seeing the entire process there. Even though they're very refined and very highly finished, you're still seeing some parts that are the original underlying painting that will show through.
Well, and I guess I can really see that in the parts where you use the gouache. Like, as you said, there's that chalkiness to it. And to me, you're able to get that tactile, physical nature of, like you said, the rust or the texture of a rock that I feel like so many painters try to recreate in oil, and you kind of just let the medium do its thing. Absolutely, yeah. In fact, there's a lot of techniques I use that are really unusual, things that I do with paint, that gouache in particular, that you never learn in art school. One of the things I learned was that, as you're painting with gouache on top of watercolor, it takes some time to fully dry. And so you've got this sort of interim period where the paint is dry to the touch, but it'll still sort of peel away if you rub it really hard. And I use a technique to paint peeling paint. So instead of sitting there for hours painting paint peeling off a wall, for example, I instead use the gouache and then rub it really hard, and it just peels off. So instead of painting peeled paint, I'm actually just peeling paint off. Wow! I never realized that.
Yeah. So the same as like the rust is created the same way, where there's sort of a randomness to it. You can't really paint peeling paint from your imagination. You have to sort of use a reference, or because it has a certain effect. But if you use a technique that is random, and it's as you're sort of rubbing it and it's peeling off randomly, you sort of get what happens in nature.
More believable.
More believable, yes. And again, a lot more enjoyable as an artist to paint this way, because you're not getting stuck in these very fine details. Well,
it's very enjoyable for the viewer as well, so that's good.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then there's another, I guess you could say, bizarre, unorthodox technique that you do as well, and I didn't realize it until I got up close to the ocean painting that you were still doing this. The ocean painting, you have a way of creating these physical bubbles and craters in the sea foam. How do you do that?
It's pretty, that's chalked it up to my being lazy, I think. I really wanted to paint sea foam, because that is so much a part of how we experience waves and such, is that foam is so has a sound even, and I really needed to get those bubbles, so I had to figure out how to change the paint so that I could just paint bubbles essentially. So what I did is I took the oil paint and diluted it quite a bit, and then used those little stick blenders they use to make foam for your coffee.
Oh yeah.
I put one of those in the paint and turn it on, and it just the same way that it adds air to milk, this adds air to paint. And so the paint sort of explodes into this foam, and you turn off the blender, and then you get a nice fluffy brush, and you apply this paint that is full of air onto the panel. And you have to paint, of course, with the panel laying flat, otherwise it'll just roll off the panel. And you just paint the foam in where you want it, and then you walk away and let it dry for a few days. And that's it. Yeah. So instead of, again, the same way that I would paint peeling paint by peeling off the paint, I'm painting foam by making foam.
It's a technique that I've never seen. Well, it's interesting because it's a technique I've never seen before except for your work. Yeah. And I wouldn't call it lazy. I mean, maybe it starts there, but it's really innovative. And I'd be very surprised if we don't see other painters after this interview, like going to buy themselves a milk frother.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the same thing happens. the same thing happened years ago with those grassy paintings when I really wanted to paint what looked like almost like a Trompe l'oeil painting of a landscape, with tons of grass everywhere. And I was trying to figure out how to do it, and I looked at my cat, and she had these beautiful long whiskers, and I thought, that's it. I want to use cat whiskers to paint these grassy paintings. And it's almost like an aha moment. It's not even innovative. It's just you get the idea, and that's it. But I suppose that if you don't want to follow all the techniques that you were taught in school, and you want to find some other way of doing things, you have to invent something different. And a lot of what keeps me interested in art in general is inventiveness, being creative with the imagery and the technique. And after so many years of studying ways of painting in art school, and that there's a set way to do things, I really felt at some point, maybe 20 years ago, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something different. And so whenever I encounter a problem, it excites me to find a new way of painting that no one has done before.
I love that. Yeah. And that will push, your work forward. I mean, where do you see your work going from here?
I really don't know. It's kind of, I think I'm ultimately a landscape painter. I think that is really what my passion, my home is as an artist, is with the landscape. But how you interpret that is very changeable. Again, for many years I painted, landscapes that were absent of mankind. And now it's, mankind is present, but almost in the past tense sense. So where things go from now, I really don't know. It's a sort of long process. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, we'll look back and say, well, there was a distinctive departure here or there. But when you're in it, you don't really think about where things are going too much. There's this sort of slow evolution that you don't notice until many years later.
Well, I hope when we look back many years later, we're hopefully seeing the benefits of some changes and things like that. So
I guarantee you will. I mean, it's almost necessary to keep this whole thing interesting for me.
Yeah, definitely. Francis, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff, and I really wish we had more time. But we unfortunately do have to wrap things up. But thanks so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate it. And I do want to say that, we're sending you and everybody else in California positive thoughts, and hope that the fires are controlled quickly, and you guys stay safe.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Of course. Great, yeah. And so just to remind everyone, Francis di Fronzo's solo exhibition at Somerville Manning Gallery runs through November 14th. It is an in-person exhibition and is on view in the gallery and open to the public. Masks are required, and we are encouraging people to call ahead when possible. We look forward to seeing you all in the gallery. Thanks for joining us today on Art Watch Radio. This is Rebecca Moore, and make sure to tune in next Wednesday from 1 to 1:30 on WCHE 1520 for a new episode. Take care, everyone.